You know, I can't even begin to imagine how stressed Joseph and Mary must have been during the time around Jesus' birth. I mean, here's Mary about to pop, and Caesar Augustus decides now is the perfect time to make everybody go to their hometowns so they can register everyone for a census. Joseph would have had to take his very pregnant wife, Mary, on foot to Bethlehem from Nazareth, which is about 80 to 90 miles. A fast caravan would have taken at least 4 days. But Mary, being pregnant, probably added a few days to the journey because you don't really move all that fast when you're that pregnant. So by the time they reached Bethlehem, all the inns were full, and so was every guest room in the city. So many people had to make the trek back to Bethlehem that by the time they got there wasn't a room to be had in that small little town. So they ended up having to stay with the animals, which were usually kept in a cave or a lower level of the house, with the family above them. Now, if you've ever been to a petting zoo, you know there's a smell, even in an open field, and not a pleasant one at that. Now, unfortunately, I don't think they had the luxury of opening a window in a cave, but I don't think it would have helped much either. As for where they had to sleep, at best they would have had hay and a rug to put over it to sleep on. They also would have had only oil lamps as their source of light, which if you've ever been without a working flashlight in a power outage, you know candlelight and oil light isn't great. With all this, you can imagine their horror as Mary's water breaks at night in a cave surrounded by very smelly animals. Not a great environment to give birth to your firstborn son, let alone giving birth at all. By the grace of God, they somehow make it through. Mary gives birth to baby Jesus. But there's another problem. They don't have any blankets to wrap him in, and neither do they have a crib to put him in. So they end up having to wrap him in strips of cloth and having to put him in a manger. Now let's stop here for a minute, because God ordained this very moment in Joseph and Mary's life. He made sure that Christ's beginning would foreshadow his end. You see, in ancient Israelite culture, bodies weren't buried in graves. They were buried in tombs or caves, and they would be placed in a fetal position, wrapped in strips of cloth. And as we learned earlier, this is how Jesus was born, because Jesus was born to die. This small, innocent little baby boy was born for the express purpose of dying for you and me. My heart broke when I first heard that, because it made everything that happened to him feel so much more unfair. This little child who's done nothing wrong would grow up and have to suffer a horrible death. But even then, he did it gladly to save us from ourselves, to save us from sin and death. It still hurts to say this little child, born to die for you and me. The story must go on, and the pressure put upon this child would only build. You see, God was not content with leaving his child's birth unannounced. He would send a messenger to the shepherds of Bethlehem, a message to the people of the lowest ring of society, because shepherds were not treated well. They smelled because of all the animals they were dealing with all day, every day. They were even thought of as liars and cheaters, because it was assumed that they would purposely guide their sheep to graze on other people's property, when controlling animals isn't exactly easy, and sheep tend to wander off. No one wanted to deal with shepherds more than what was absolutely necessary. And it was these people that God first announced salvation to the poor shepherds of Bethlehem. And after they received that message, they told everyone they could about it. But God wasn't content on announcing it just to those in Bethlehem. There were others that were waiting and watching for the Messiah. The Magi were waiting and looking in a far-off land for any sign of the Messiah. But why? They weren't Jewish. They were Gentiles of a different faith. Or were they? You see, in all likelihood, they may have been descendants of Daniel and of those carried off into exile that never returned. That would explain why they were looking for Jesus in the first place, even if they were no longer Jewish. And it wasn't just 3 people that came to worship Jesus. It was a large enough group of people for the king to take notice and be worried about. Now, it took them a long time to get to Israel and find Jesus. By the time they got there, Jesus was around 2 years old already. But the foreshadowing of Jesus' future was not yet done. Not until they arrived and brought their gifts. A gift of gold, often reserved as a gift for kings. It foreshadowed Jesus' future role as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Frankincense, the next gift, was used in the temple as a part of the offerings in the temple. It would foreshadow his priestly role and higher calling. And finally, myrrh. It served a similar purpose. It was part of the anointing oil used to consecrate things like the tabernacle and the kings of Israel. But it was also an important embalming agent. So this foreshadowed his death and his anointing as king. So with all this foreshadowing and all these people coming, you can imagine the pressure that Mary and Joseph felt from all these people. All the expectations those people had for this little baby boy. They expected him to be smarter than Solomon, who was the very caricature of wisdom by that point. They expected him to be braver than David, who stood as a boy against Goliath. They expected him to be stronger than Samson, who killed a lion with his bare hands. They expected him to perform miracles like Elijah and Elisha, who raised the dead. They expected him to be a better leader than Joshua, who led the Israelites into the promised land and defeated all the Canaanites. They expected him to be all this and still more. They expected him to beat Rome and all their enemies, to bring the temple back to its former glory and usher in an age of peace for Israel. They had so many expectations for him, and each and every single person had their own idea on who he was supposed to be. Even God had expectations of him. He was expected to be perfect, to never make a mistake. He was expected to be sinless, to never wrong anyone. He was expected to be the perfect example for us, and he was expected to die for us, this weak, helpless baby who couldn't even survive a night by himself, and the weight of the world thrust upon his tiny shoulders. Everyone expected so much from him, but still more pressure awaited him. The people who were desperate and waiting to be saved. The fact that he would have to take on the sins of the world by himself. He would be celebrated and despised by the very people he was trying to help. He would be treated like an outcast by his own people. But even with all this pressure, all this stress, right now, there is peace. Right now, all the expectations of the world and all its weight could wait. Right now, while God's Son rests in a manger with Mary and Joseph by his side, all is calm. Everything is quiet. All the creatures lay down their heads to rest, and all the people do the same. Right now, there's no need to worry, no need to panic. We can all take a sigh of relief and just appreciate the gift of life. So even though a mountain of pressure and expectations await him, All he needs to do right now is rest and grow. For God granted him peace. Even with everything on the horizon, Jesus only had to worry about today. In his own words in Matthew 6:34, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. Today's trouble is enough for today." That's a piece of advice from Jesus I think we should all take to heart. After all, he had more reasons to worry than we ever could, yet still he was at peace. When he started his ministry, we didn't even see an inkling of worry from him. When he was in the middle of the wilderness fasting and being tempted, he was still at peace. He didn't show any signs of stress. Even when he was in the middle of a hurricane on the Sea of Galilee, he was at peace. He was asleep in a boat. Throughout his life, God gave him peace, even when it didn't make sense to be at peace. And through Christ, we can have that same peace. Paul, when he was under house arrest writing letters, still had peace through Jesus Christ. I myself have been the subject of this peace that God gives us. I would be lying to say I haven't been stressed to the point of breaking. The expectations others have had for me and the ones I've had for myself put a tremendous amount of pressure on me. When I close my eyes and think of God and Jesus Christ, I find this peace there waiting for me. This sense of serenity fills me to my core. I remember being so stressed out, writing my first sermon, that I could feel my heart beating at times. But when I took a minute to pray and center myself on God, I was given peace of mind and peace of soul. And through Jesus Christ, it is possible to obtain this peace. That same level of peace felt the night Jesus was born. All the world's problems melt away, and all that matters is the here and now, the time spent with the Lord in peace. I have a favor to ask. I want you to take some time and spend it with God this week so that you too can be granted this peace.